word of God for the people of God. From Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. After he agreed with the workers to pay them a denarian, he sent them into his vineyard. Then he went out around 9 in the morning and saw others standing around the marketplace doing nothing. He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." And they went. Again, around noon, and then at 3 in the afternoon, he did the same thing. Around 5 in the afternoon, he went and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you just standing around here doing nothing all day long?" "Because nobody has hired us," they replied. He responded, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the workers and give them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and moving on finally to the first." When those who were hired at 5 in the afternoon came, each one received a denarian. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarian. When they received it, they grumbled against the landowner. "These were hired last, worked 1 hour, and they received the same pay as we did, even though we had to work the whole day in the hot sun." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I did you no wrong. Didn't I agree to pay you a denarian? Take what belongs to you and go. I want to give to this one who was hired last the same as I give to you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with what belongs to me? Or are you resentful because I'm generous?" So those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last. Brothers and sisters, these words are trustworthy and true, and we can believe them. Andrew is going to come up and share with us. What are we sharing with us today?
So I think some of you have seen people do it. I'm probably going to switch to this one so I don't have to hold this. Turn that one off because otherwise Ben will not be happy. And I have to move some things. Do you have me, Ben? All right. So as a tech guy, that is a very important thing to check. So as some of you know, over the last year or so, we've had a couple people share their why I love St. John's. Mary Jane had asked me to do that. And I have to say, I was pretty quick to say yes to it. And then I remembered something. I'm not much of a writer. You could ask any of my English teachers growing up and they would tell you as such. I also knew, though, that I better get something written down. Otherwise, you guys might be stuck here for a little bit listening to my incoherent thoughts as I try to piece it together. Before I can really explain why I love St. John's, I feel you need to understand how I got here. From the time I was born, I have belonged to a UCC church. Being from a small town in central Minnesota, the church was certainly not large by any means, but it certainly helped shape who I am today. One of the church's big things was sending kids to the church camp that the conference owned. They paid at least half of the cost of camp for every kid that wanted to attend camp, no matter the family's financial situation. Oftentimes paying more than half, even if the family could have covered it. It was important to them that if a kid wanted to go to camp, that they went. What this meant for me is from the time I think I was around, 8 or 9, until I graduated high school, I spent a week at Pilgrim Point Camp every summer. Over the years, I gained friendships and relationships that exist even to this day. While the church camp was always a presence in my life, I must say that my weekly attendance to church as I got into my teenage years started to drop for a variety of reasons, as is often the case. Between working, school, and other activities, my time was more limited. Combine that with the fact that my mother began working as a licensed minister in another local UCC church, meant that I would be going alone if I went, and it just became less of a priority. But even in this time, Pilgrim Point was a priority, and I was sure to be there every summer. Fast forward a few years, and I'm in college, and I make the decision to chase a job almost 500 miles from home. After moving to the area, I thought about finding a church again, but I just never actually got myself to service to check one out. Shortly after moving to Wisconsin, I got some terrible news. A friend of mine from church camp was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. My friend Jason got his diagnosis in the fall of 2013, and in January of 2014, he passed away at the age of 20. Now, it is hard for me to explain how hard that hit me. Jason was one of my closest friends from camp. I believe we met my second year going to Pilgrim Point when we were about 10. And from there on out, we requested to be in the same cabin every year until we graduated high school. In a lot of ways, he was like a brother. We shared so many experiences, laughs, and time together over the years. And then he was gone in what felt like an instant. Jason was one of those people who loved life and always had a smile on and wanted to make sure everyone else did as well. It was also a first time for me in a sense of losing someone I was close to that was my age, which made me face my own mortality in a way that I never had. I remember his funeral in so much detail. From where I sat in that church in Anoka, to who I sat with, and the conversations that were had that day. One of the things that really stood out to me that day was how many of us that had went to camp together over the years were there. These were people that came to camp from churches across Minnesota growing up, and camp was really our only connection. But we all assembled not only to remember and mourn the loss of Jason, but to be there for each other and for Jason's family. Now, to say that experience was a catalyst for me ending up here would be correct, but it certainly wasn't immediate. Following Jason's funeral, it was probably about another year before I finally showed up at St. John's on a Sunday morning. I imagine my experience walking in the doors that day was not really all that different from what many of you have experienced the first time you walked through those doors. It was honestly a bit overwhelming. Walking into a small community for the first time by yourself, you know that you will be noticed, even if you would have rather blended in. That feeling that everyone is watching you can be a bit intimidating. I must say, though, that feeling faded fairly quickly. By the time I left that day, the connections had already started. I found people with common backgrounds and experiences, and even people with whom I had mutual connections. I may not have realized it at that moment, but it was probably the first sign that I had found a home. However, what I experienced that day was enough for me to want to come back again. And a little bit of a spoiler, I did come back. What amazed me in the coming months was how quickly the connections grew. Every week it seemed I learned more about someone or met another person I hadn't before. I even remember being caught a little off guard by just how fast those connections grew a few times. One time I can think of was probably about 2 months after I started coming to St. John's at a local Subway in Pewaukee. And he's already... I was grabbing lunch as it was near where I worked at the time, and I walked in the front door, and I heard a voice call out my name, and not one that I really recognized. I looked around, still confused, and then I saw a woman with 2 young boys that I kind of recognized waving at me. I have since come to know this woman as Sarah Hine. Apparently, Zach, who was all of about 6 or 7 at this time, had recognized me and my truck as I pulled in the lot and pointed me out even before I made it in the door. Apparently, we teach the art of identifying people by their vehicles young here at St. John's. Looking back now, this was just another sign I had found my place. When a 7-year-old you have never really met points you out to his mother, who you also don't know all that well, and you are still flagged down with enthusiasm so that they can say hi, it just may be a signal that you are not only welcome, but have found your home. And man, did I find a home. When I think about my life now, it would be impossible to imagine it without St. John's, as it would be so different. The connections I have made here and continue to make here have changed and shaped my life beyond measure. Over the last 9-ish years, the stories that I could tell are ever growing and continue to amaze me that all of them have come out of this place. Several times over the years, Mary Jane has put together photos that recap some of the things we have done in the prior year. What amazes me when looking at the pictures is knowing I was involved in many of the activities shown, but still not being able to believe that all of those things were done in 1 year. I know it has been said a lot here over the years, but St. John's is a small and mighty congregation. We are a congregation that takes our faith far beyond our doors or sitting in the pews on a Sunday morning. We are a community that takes action and does what we can to make the world better. While I may not be able to recall every one of Mary Jane's sermons over the years, there are a few I do remember. One particular Sunday, she talked about changing the world. And that is what we do here, is change the world. As she mentioned, we may not change the whole world in one action, but certainly we have changed the world of some of those who have been served by this congregation and also those who serve in this congregation. But as Mary Jane also mentioned that day, changing the world for one person truly does change the world. That sort of ministry speaks to me at my core. To me, my faith, without serving others and being active and intentional in those acts, just wouldn't be the same. Being here at St. John's allows me to be active and involved in work that helps me live out my faith with a group of people who also have that drive to serve others. In my experience in church growing up, as well as talking to other people about their experiences at church, the community of St. John's is truly rare. The commitment to each other and the work we do together has created an energy that feeds us and allows us to accomplish all of the things that we do. Many churches and people are currently mourning their losses when it comes to church, mourning declining attendance and participation, and a general loss of their identity. Many at times are also dealing with the idea that they may soon need to close entirely. What I find unique about St. John's is that while we honor and acknowledge our long history, we're also open to the possibilities of the future. Open to ideas of how to be a church that is relevant and meaningful now, while also not forgetting how we got here. Also being a church that judges our impact not by how many people are in the sanctuary on a Sunday morning, but on the impact our congregation has in our community, both locally and globally. For me, I think the very best way to sum up why I love St. John's is the community. Much like the community I gained from all my years at Pilgrim Point, this community is supportive and present. For me, it is a large part of why this area became more than where I lived and became my home. St. John's has become one of the larger reasons that I have stayed in this area through all of the changes in my life over the last several years. This is because I know no matter what I face, I have a community that will stand with me and support me and continue to empower me to support others. That is why I love St. John's.